Everything you know about driving, you learned from people who were also guessing. 30 years of confident wrong answers, and you passed a test on them. Here are 42 of the biggest. 1. Every driving instructor in history has drawn a clock face on a whiteboard and declared that 10 and 2 is the sacred, non-negotiable law of the steering wheel, the one correct hand position passed down through generations like religious doctrine. Here is what they forgot to mention. 10 and 2 was designed for a world without power steering, when steering wheels required serious physical force to turn and higher hand placement gave drivers actual mechanical leverage. That problem was solved decades ago. Modern power steering made the leverage argument completely irrelevant, but nobody updated the whiteboard. The real reason this changed is airbags. A deploying airbag travels at roughly 200 miles per hour, and hands positioned at 10 and 2 sit directly in the deployment path. The force can drive your own hands into your face, producing broken noses, facial fractures, and arm injuries from the safety feature, not the crash. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration updated its recommendation to 9 and 3 years ago. The 8AA followed. Professional driver training programs followed. Your state driving test, however, still quietly rewards 10 and 2 out of pure institutional inertia. Because updating a whiteboard drawing requires admitting the previous drawing was putting people in the hospital. 2. Every driving instructor has delivered this advice with complete authority. If you hit ice, pump the brakes rapidly to prevent skidding. Your parents repeated it. Your grandparents swore by it. It has the confident ring of mechanical folk wisdom earned through hard winters. Here's the problem. Pumping the brakes was the correct technique for old drum brake systems without anti-lock technology. If your car was built after roughly the mid-1980s and has anti-lock brakes, manually pumping the pedal actively defeats the safety system specifically engineered to do that job better than your foot ever could. Anti-lock braking systems pump the brakes automatically at up to 15 times per second, far faster than any human leg can manage. The correct technique for a car with ABS is to press the brake pedal firmly, hold it continuously, and steer. The pulsing sensation you feel through the pedal is the system working correctly. Releasing pressure in response to that sensation interrupts the process mid-cycle and hands control back to your significantly slower reflexes. By 2013, ABS became federally mandated on all new passenger vehicles sold in the United States, meaning virtually every car currently on the road has this system. The pump the brakes instruction is now actively counterproductive for nearly every driver receiving it, and it is still being taught with complete confidence every single winter. 3. The hands-free phone call feels like the responsible solution. Both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, legal in most places, conscience clear. The logic seems airtight. If the danger is holding the phone, then removing the phone from your hand removes the danger. That logic is wrong, and the National Safety Council analyzed over 30 studies to confirm it. Hands-free calling produces cognitive distraction functionally equivalent to holding the phone, because the dangerous part was never your hands. The human brain does not fully multitask. It switches rapidly between tasks, and a phone conversation requires constructing language, tracking social context, and formulating responses, all simultaneously with operating a vehicle. The brain deprioritizes visual processing during demanding cognitive tasks, producing a phenomenon researchers call inattention blindness. Drivers on hands-free calls have been shown in eye tracking studies to look directly at hazards and fail to register them because seeing and processing are two entirely separate neurological events. A passenger in the car is measurably less dangerous than a phone call because passengers naturally pause conversation during complex driving moments and share the driver's visual environment. The person on the phone has no awareness of road conditions and does not adjust. You moved the phone from your hand to your dashboard and called it safety. The dangerous part was always the conversation, and the conversation is still happening. 4. A green light is permission to proceed. This is the first traffic law every child learns, and it is not questioned because it seems definitional. Green means go. What driver's ed consistently omits is the second half of that sentence. Green means go only if the intersection is clear. Right-of-way is a legal concept. It is not a physical force field. The legal fact that you had a green light is most useful at the inquest. It does not prevent a vehicle currently running the red from removing you from the intersection at full speed. Red light running causes approximately 100,000 crashes annually in the United States, according to the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, and the majority of fatalities from those crashes are the drivers who had the green light and entered without checking. Clearing the intersection, pausing briefly to scan cross traffic before proceeding on green, is taught in advanced driver training and professional driving programs. It is almost universally absent from standard driver's ed. Studies of intersection crash patterns consistently find that a delay of 1 to 2 seconds before entering on green dramatically reduces collision risk at high-risk intersections, because it allows the final red light runners to clear. You were taught that a colored light grants you safe passage. It grants you legal permission. Whether something is currently crossing in front of you is a separate question you are supposed to ask every single time. 5. Size equals safety. This is practically the founding philosophy of the American automotive market, and it has sold an enormous number of large vehicles to people who believed they were purchasing protection. A bigger vehicle absorbs less impact in a collision with a smaller vehicle. That part is accurate. The problem is that single vehicle crashes, which represent a substantial percentage of fatal accidents, eliminate that advantage entirely. A large SUV rolling over kills its occupants regardless of its mass advantage over a sedan, and SUVs have a significantly higher rollover risk than passenger cars due to their elevated center of gravity. The NHTSA rollover resistance ratings consistently show that many large vehicles score poorly, and rollover crashes are among the most fatal collision types. Crash compatibility is a recognized engineering concept. Large vehicles designed without specific compatibility features can override the crumple zones of smaller cars, directing impact force into the occupant compartment rather than absorbing it in the structure. Mass without design is not safety. Modern small vehicles with high safety ratings routinely outperform larger vehicles with lower ratings in controlled crash tests because engineering, crumple zones, and airbag systems matter more than tonnage. You did not buy safety. You bought the feeling of being large. Those are different products with very different outcomes, and the sticker price does not tell you which one you actually purchased. 6. Steer into the skid. Every parent, every driving instructor, and every older relative has delivered this advice with the gravity of hard-won wisdom. It applies universally to any skidding situation. Full stop, no qualifications. Except there is a qualification, and it is the entire point. Steer into the skid only applies to rear wheel skids. Applied to a front wheel skid, the advice produces the opposite of the intended result. A rear wheel skid, called oversteer, occurs when the back of the car slides out. Countersteering, turning toward the slide, realigns the rear wheels with the direction of travel. This is what the classic advice correctly describes. A front wheel skid, called understeer, occurs when the front wheels lose grip and the car pushes straight regardless of steering input. In this case, steering into the skid means turning the wheel more sharply, which accomplishes nothing because the front tires have already lost traction. The correct response is to ease off the throttle, reduce speed, and allow the tires to regain grip. Most modern front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive vehicles are more prone to understeer than oversteer, meaning the situation where the classic advice is wrong is actually the more common scenario for the majority of drivers receiving it. One piece of advice that applies in one situation, repeated as though it applies to all situations, has been confidently making skids worse for decades. 7. The moment a passenger reaches for the interior dome light on a nighttime drive, the driver reacts with alarm. It is illegal. You will distract the other drivers. You will get a ticket. Every parent has delivered this warning with the authority of someone who knows the law. No such law exists. Driving with interior cabin lights on is legal in all 50 United States and in the vast majority of countries. Exhaustive review of vehicle codes has failed to produce a statute prohibiting it anywhere. Legal researchers and traffic attorneys have confirmed this repeatedly when asked. The myth likely originates from a kernel of genuine physics. Interior lighting at night can create glare on the windshield that makes it slightly harder for the driver to see in darkness, similar to trying to see through a lighted window at night. But slightly inconvenient and illegal are not the same category, and the gap between them is the entire myth. Authorities may ask passengers to dim distracting lights or cite a driver under broader reckless driving statutes if visibility is severely compromised. But that is a stretch requiring extreme circumstances, not a specific prohibition covering normal dome light use. This myth has been perpetuated primarily by parents who needed a fast, authoritative reason to stop something mildly annoying on road trips, and it has been accepted as fact by multiple subsequent generations without anyone ever checking. 8. Driving significantly below the flow of traffic is treated as the responsible choice, the mark of a cautious person who takes safety seriously. The slower you go, the safer you are. It is repeated so often it feels like physics. It is not physics, and in many cases it is not even legal. Studies from the Transportation Research Institute found that vehicles traveling well below the average speed of surrounding traffic are involved in more accidents than vehicles traveling at or slightly above average speed. Speed differential, not raw speed, is the primary crash risk factor. More than 30 United States have minimum speed laws on highways, and driving too slowly can result in a moving violation citation. The phenomenon is called the speed variance effect. The greater the difference between your speed and surrounding traffic, the more conflict points you create. Every car that has to brake, swerve, or change lanes because of your pace is a potential crash event you generated. In a landmark 1964 study that shaped decades of highway design, researcher David Solomon found crash rates were lowest near the average speed of traffic and rose sharply in both directions. Too fast and too slow both increase risk. The person doing 45 in the fast lane while congratulating themselves on being careful is not a responsible driver. They are a traffic hazard with good intentions and a clean conscience. 9. The left lane is culturally understood as the province of speed, the domain of fast drivers who have earned their place through velocity. Lingering in it at any pace feels like the God-given right of anyone going faster than the car to their right. This has no basis in traffic law. The left lane is legally the passing lane in most jurisdictions, not a permanent travel lane, and occupying it without actively passing is a moving violation in the majority of United States states. As of recent years, more than 30 states have enacted specific left lane statutes prohibiting anything other than passing with fines attached. Several states have recently increased enforcement and expanded public awareness campaigns around it. The misconception that speed determines lane rights, the belief that going fast enough justifies permanent left lane residency, is entirely absent from traffic code. The law defines the left lane by its passing function, not by the speed of its occupant. Left lane camping contributes directly to weaving behavior. Drivers forced to pass on the right, instead, create more dangerous merge conflicts involving blind spots. In Germany, where left lane camping on the Autobahn is aggressively enforced and culturally stigmatized, the road safety record per mile traveled is frequently comparable to more regulated lower speed highways elsewhere. You borrowed the left lane for the purpose of passing. The loan is due the moment you finish, not when you feel like returning it. 10. New drivers are taught to focus on the car directly ahead. That is your reference point. Maintain appropriate distance from that vehicle and you are managing your space correctly. This produces drivers who react to events that have already happened. A hazard that caused the car ahead to brake began further up the road, and by the time brake lights appear, the full chain reaction compression is already underway. Professional drivers in advanced training programs teach looking further ahead, 12 to 15 seconds of travel time into the distance, because the vehicle directly in front of you is already too late as an information source. The 12-second rule is taught in commercial driving programs, police pursuit driving courses, and performance driving schools as the baseline for anticipatory driving. It is almost never present in standard driver's ed curricula. Highway hypnosis, the trance-like state that causes drivers to mentally check out on long monotonous drives, is significantly reduced when drivers practice extended visual scanning because it keeps the visual processing system actively engaged with changing information. Racing programs teach drivers to look well into corners rather than at the barrier immediately ahead for the same neurological reason. The eyes lead the hands, and where you look is where the vehicle goes. You are taught to watch the thing that is already too close to matter. Looking further ahead is not advanced driving. It is looking before the problem has already arrived in front of you. 11. Turn signals are understood as a communication tool for other cars. No cars nearby means no signal needed. Why perform for an empty audience? You are alone on the road, the turn is obvious, and the signal is a formality for traffic that does not exist at this moment. Most state vehicle codes require signaling a minimum of 100 feet before a turn, not when someone is watching, but as a mandatory procedural step before every turn, regardless of conditions. The human brain is notoriously bad at detecting what it is not actively looking for. Cyclists and pedestrians are most frequently struck by turning vehicles precisely in low traffic conditions where the driver made the nobody is around assessment and stopped scanning. A 2012 study by the Society of Automotive Engineers estimated that turn signal neglect causes approximately 2 million crashes annually in the United States, more than distracted driving at the time of publication. The signal also functions as a cognitive cue for the driver. The physical act of signaling triggers a checking behavior: mirror glance, head check, scan. Skipping the signal also skips those steps. The light visible to other drivers is actually the least important part of what the signal does. The more important part is what it prompts you to do before you make the turn that gets people killed. 12. Parallel parking is treated as the ultimate trial in driver's education, the gauntlet through which all serious drivers must pass to earn the right to operate a vehicle on public roads. It receives more dedicated practice time than nearly any other skill taught in the course. A 2017 survey found that a significant majority of licensed drivers actively avoid parallel parking in daily life, choosing structured lots or garages, even when street parking is available and free. The driving test was designed in an era when parallel parking was a primary urban skill, and it has not been substantially reconsidered since. Meanwhile, merging onto highways, one of the highest risk driving maneuvers by statistical measure, receives minimal standardized test attention. Highway merging requires speed matching, gap assessment, and decisive execution under genuine time pressure. It is practiced on an actual highway perhaps once during the average driver's education course. Countries with notably higher road safety outcomes, including Sweden and the Netherlands, structure driving evaluations heavily around hazard perception, traffic behavior assessment, and real-world scenario navigation rather than cone-defined parking boxes. You are rigorously evaluated on the skill you will spend the rest of your driving life avoiding, and briefly introduced to the one you will execute every single week. The test was designed for a different city in a different century and has been largely preserved intact. 13. The right turn on red rule sounds simple. Stop completely, then proceed when clear. Every driver learns it, and most treat it as a universal permission that applies everywhere with the same mechanics. It does not. Right turns on red are prohibited by default in many jurisdictions, and the rules vary so dramatically across locations that the oversimplified version of the advice is genuinely dangerous. Right turn on red was only legalized nationally in the United States following the 1973 oil crisis as a fuel conservation measure. It is a relatively recent legal accommodation, not a timeless traffic principle. New York City prohibits right turns on red at virtually all intersections unless a sign explicitly permits it. Drivers trained on the general rule and visiting the city routinely make illegal turns with complete confidence because they learned a rule and assumed it applied everywhere. In many countries, including the United Kingdom, Australia, and most of continental Europe, the equivalent maneuver is flatly illegal with no exceptions whatsoever. Many intersections with technical legal permission to turn still have posted no turn on red signs that drivers miss because they have already decided the general rule covers their situation. You memorized one rule and assumed it applied to the entire planet. It does not even apply to every intersection in the city you live in. 14. Every parent and every older relative has delivered the formula with complete authority. 1 standard drink per hour and you are fine. Wait it out, count your drinks, do the arithmetic, and drive. It is presented as reliable enough to use as a personal sobriety calculator. The blood alcohol concentration elimination rate varies from approximately 0.010 to 0.025 BIC per hour across individuals. At the slower end of that range, someone takes more than twice as long to eliminate the same amount of alcohol as someone at the faster end. Body weight and body water percentage dramatically affect BAC at the point of consumption. A 120-pound person and a 200-pound person consuming identical drinks will have significantly different BAC levels, meaning the 1 drink per hour countdown starts from different points for different people every single time. The formula also assumes a standard drink containing 14 grams of pure alcohol, which does not correspond to how drinks are actually poured, mixed, or sold. A craft beer can be twice the alcohol content of a light beer. A cocktail varies depending entirely on whoever made it. No behavioral or perceptual test reliably indicates actual impairment, and impairment at legally significant BAC levels frequently feels like sobriety to the person who is impaired, particularly for regular drinkers who have developed tolerance to the subjective sensation. You were given a population statistic and told to bet your life on its personal accuracy. 15. High beams and fog. Fog makes it hard to see. High beams project more light. More light and fog equals better visibility. This seems like elementary logic, which is exactly why so many drivers do it, and exactly why it makes things significantly worse. Fog consists of suspended water droplets that scatter light in all directions. High beams project a strong beam forward and upward directly into the droplet layer, producing backscatter. The light bounces off the water particles and returns toward the driver rather than penetrating through to illuminate anything useful. The result is a wall of white glare that obscures everything beyond it. Fog lights are mounted low on the vehicle specifically to project light below the fog layer, illuminating the road surface where it is less obscured by suspended moisture. This is a deliberate optical engineering choice, not a styling decision. The same principle applies to snow and heavy rain. High beams create significantly more backscatter and precipitation than low beams, reducing effective seeing distance even as they increase raw light output. Surveys of driver behavior in adverse conditions consistently find a meaningful percentage of drivers switching to high beams and fog on the assumption that maximum light output equals maximum visibility. That assumption is precisely backward. You tried to solve reduced visibility with maximum brightness and created a blindfold instead. More light aimed in the wrong direction is not better vision. It is just brighter blindness. 16. The 3-second following distance rule is presented as the universal safe following distance, taught in driver's ed, printed in manuals, and referenced by every traffic safety program as a settled number. 3 seconds covers it. 3 seconds is a minimum calculated for ideal conditions, and it does not automatically expand to account for adverse weather, impaired reaction times, heavy vehicles, high speeds, or any of the conditions under which most serious rear-end collisions actually occur. The 3-second rule was derived from studies of average reaction time, approximately 1.5 seconds, plus average braking distance at moderate highway speeds on dry pavement. At highway speed and rain, stopping distances increase by 30 to 50%. 3 seconds of following distance at 70 miles per hour represents approximately 308 feet, which may or may not be sufficient depending on precipitation, tire condition, and surface drainage. The rule does not expand automatically when conditions change. Large commercial trucks are legally required to maintain greater following distances due to their extended stopping capabilities. Advanced driving programs teach 4 to 6 seconds as a working target, reflecting that the additional buffer is almost never wasted and is sometimes the only variable that prevented a crash from occurring. 3 seconds is what you need if nothing goes wrong. Crashes are, definitionally, what happens when something goes wrong. The extra second costs you nothing in any practical sense. 17. 1 human year equals 7 dog years was designed for dashboards, not driving. But the equivalent precision myth in driving is average reaction time. 1 second, clean, calculable, taught as a fixed biological fact from which stopping distances are neatly derived. 1 second is a best-case laboratory figure for an alert, undistracted driver expecting a specific stimulus and prepared to respond to it. Driving involves unexpected stimuli, a child entering the road, a vehicle braking suddenly ahead, a tire blowing in the adjacent lane, which add cognitive processing time before any physical response begins. Real-world reaction time under normal driving conditions is typically 1.5 seconds or longer, and factors like distraction, fatigue, or genuine surprise can push it well past 2 seconds. At 60 miles per hour, a vehicle travels 88 feet per second. At a 1.5 second reaction time, that is 132 feet of travel before the driver's foot contacts the brake pedal. The 3 second following distance rule only accounts for this reality if drivers actually maintain it, which studies show they consistently do not. Alcohol at the legal limit of 0.08 BAC increases reaction time by approximately 20%. Texting while driving has been shown in simulator studies to impair reaction time more severely than alcohol at that threshold. The 1 second teaching figure creates a false sense of precision that makes following distance feel like a solved equation rather than a variable that changes with every condition present on the road at that moment. 18. Four-wheel drive conquers winter. This is the belief that moves enormous numbers of large vehicles every autumn as buyers decide that all-wheel power distribution is the purchase that makes ice and snow manageable. SUV owners proceed into snowy conditions with noticeably reduced caution because 4 wheels pulling is surely better than 2. Four-wheel drive affects only acceleration and traction when starting and moving forward. It has zero effect on braking distance. A 4-wheel drive vehicle on snow stops in exactly the same distance as a comparable 2-wheel drive vehicle on the same surface with the same tires, because braking is determined by tire contact patches and the friction between tire and road surface. 4-wheel drive adds power to additional wheels, but braking force is generated by 4-wheel braking, regardless of whether the drive system is 2-wheel or 4-wheel. All cars already brake on all 4 wheels. The false security is documented in insurance claim data. 4-wheel drive vehicles are overrepresented in single-vehicle winter crashes relative to their market share, specifically because owners drive at higher speeds in conditions where their stopping distance remains unchanged. Winter tire compound is far more significant for winter safety than drive system. A front-wheel drive car with 4 dedicated winter tires substantially outperforms a 4-wheel drive vehicle on all-season tires in braking, cornering, and overall control. 4-wheel drive means 4 wheels pulling you forward. All cars already had 4 wheels slowing you down. You bought confidence in one direction and assumed it worked in the other. 19. Driving barefoot is illegal. The moment a driver mentions it, someone nearby produces this fact with complete certainty. It is unsafe, improper, against the law, the kind of reckless behavior traffic codes specifically prohibit. No United States state has a statute prohibiting barefoot driving. This has been confirmed repeatedly by legal researchers, traffic attorneys, and state DMV communications across all 50 states. The law simply does not exist. The origin of the myth is unclear, but has been circulating since at least the 1990s, surviving entirely through confident repetition. The absence of a barefoot prohibition does not mean footwear choice is irrelevant. High heels change the angle at which force is applied to pedals. Flip-flops and loose footwear can wedge under pedals or slip off at critical moments. If a crash occurs while barefoot, a prosecutor or civil attorney could theoretically argue that footwear was a contributing factor under broader reckless driving statutes, even without a specific prohibition. Barefoot driving actually provides better sensory feedback through the pedal than thick-soled footwear, which is why it is a theoretically reasonable choice from a tactile control standpoint. That irony completely inverts the myth. Everyone was confidently wrong in the same direction on this one, and the law they were certain existed was invented by nobody in particular and believed by virtually everyone. 20 roundabouts are European absurdities. This is the cultural consensus that has resisted significant evidence for decades. They are confusing, chaotic, and wildly more dangerous than the simple, orderly traffic light system that every American driver already understands. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety reports that converting signalized intersections to roundabouts reduces fatal and injury crashes by 72 to 80% and all crashes by approximately 35 to 40%. The mechanism is geometric. Roundabouts eliminate the high-speed right-angle collision type that signalized intersections produce when drivers run red lights, because that specific crash geometry cannot occur in a circular traffic pattern. Roundabouts reduce conflict points, the places where vehicle paths can intersect, from 32 at a standard 4-way signalized intersection to 8. Every eliminated conflict point is an entire category of crash that cannot physically happen. Traffic delays at well-designed roundabouts are lower than at signalized intersections during off-peak hours because vehicles yield and enter without waiting for signal cycles, improving throughput in most scenarios. The confusion argument is a learning curve issue, not a design flaw. Studies in communities where roundabouts were introduced over strong driver objection show that public opposition dropped significantly within 2 years as familiarity increases and crash rates demonstrably fall. You preferred the intersection design that allows cars to hit each other at full speed from perpendicular angles. The circular alternative makes that specific crash geometrically impossible. The confusion was never about roundabouts, it was about novelty. 21 hazard lights in rain. Visibility is reduced. Hazard lights make you more visible. More visible equals safer. This logic is so intuitive that many drivers automatically activate hazard lights the moment rain intensifies, feeling responsible and proactive. Hazard lights use the same physical bulbs as turn signals. When hazards are active, your turn signal produces no visible output distinguishable to following drivers, or produces a confusing strobing pattern that cannot be differentiated from the general hazard pattern. Following drivers cannot determine whether you are turning, changing lanes, or simply driving with hazards on in the rain. Several European countries, including Germany and France, specifically prohibit hazard light use in rain while driving. The United Kingdom Highway Code explicitly states that hazard lights should not be used while a vehicle is moving except to warn of a temporary obstruction. Several United States states have similar restrictions in their vehicle codes, though enforcement is limited. The correct response to reduced visibility is reducing speed, increasing following distance, and ensuring low beams and dedicated fog lights are properly activated. You turned on your hazard lights to help people understand where you are going, then remove the only lights that actually communicate where you are going. You replaced directional information with amber noise, and you did it while feeling like the safety-conscious driver on the road. 22. The parallel to shore instruction for rip currents is taught, but the one that kills people most efficiently is the instinct to fight directly back to the beach. Panic takes over and convinces you that a hard swim against the current will return you to safety. Rip currents flow outward at speeds that easily outpace competitive swimmers. By relentlessly fighting the flow head-on, you burn through limited energy reserves and guarantee exhaustion. This is not a driving myth, but the equivalent mechanical panic in a vehicle is equally predictable. Braking in the middle of a turn. A corner approaches too fast. The universal new driver instinct is immediate braking right now. Carry less speed through the turn. Use the brakes to control the situation. Braking while already in a turn is one of the most effective ways to lose control of a vehicle, particularly in adverse conditions. A tire has a finite amount of grip, and every tire simultaneously manages braking, acceleration, and cornering forces. Applying heavy braking while cornering demands more total grip than the tire can supply, causing one or more tires to break loose. The phrase taught in performance driving schools is slow in, fast out, decelerate to the appropriate speed before entering the corner, then apply light throttle through and out of the turn to stabilize weight distribution. The moment you panic brake mid-corner, you have told your tires to do 3 things at once with resources allocated for 2. The car will decide which task it drops without consulting you. 23. Cruise control is categorically dangerous in wet conditions. Conventional wisdom holds that if a tire hydroplanes, the system will accelerate to maintain its set speed and send the car into an uncontrolled skid. Therefore, rain means cruise control off, no exceptions, full stop. The original concern applied to older cruise control systems on vehicles without traction control. A hydroplaning tire would spin freely, the speed sensor would detect reduced road speed, and the system would add throttle to compensate, worsening the hydroplane. That was a real problem for a specific generation of technology. Modern cruise control systems on vehicles with electronic stability control automatically disengage or reduce throttle when wheel slip is detected, specifically to prevent the scenario the myth describes. Electronic stability control became federally mandated on all new United States passenger vehicles in 2012. The cruise control danger scenario is largely a pre-2012 concern being applied wholesale to a post-2012 vehicle fleet on roads full of post-2012 cars. Heavy rain does still warrant disengaging cruise control for attentiveness reasons because reduced visibility and difficult hazard detection require active driver engagement, not because the mechanical runaway scenario is the guaranteed catastrophe it is portrayed as being. The advice was accurate, then technology changed, and the advice did not. You have been manually driving through every light drizzle to protect yourself from a system your car stopped using a decade ago. 24. The myth that you should come to a near stop or yield at very low speed at the end of a highway on-ramp and wait for a gap before carefully merging is framed as courtesy and caution. It produces the opposite of safety. A merging vehicle entering at significantly below highway speed is the primary hazard in on-ramp collisions. The on-ramp is specifically engineered to provide the distance required to accelerate from 0 to highway speed and complete a smooth, gap-based merge at road velocity. Using the ramp as a waiting area and entering at 30 miles per hour onto a 65 mile per hour highway creates a speed differential of 35 miles per hour, which is physically similar to a stationary object in an active travel lane. Traffic engineering studies show that low-speed merging requires significantly larger gaps because the merging vehicle takes longer to traverse the merge zone, demanding that the highway traffic either brake or swerve over a much longer time window. The zipper merge, alternating vehicles at the merge point from 2 lanes to 1, has been demonstrated by the transportation departments in multiple states to reduce merge-related backups by up to 40% and reduce collision rates. It requires both vehicles to be at comparable speeds. Driver's ed instruction frequently focuses on the courtesy of yielding rather than the physics of why merging at speed is actually the cooperative behavior in this scenario. The ramp is a runway. Stopping at the end of it out of politeness is a hazard wearing the costume of consideration. 25. Motorcycles can stop faster than cars. They are light and nimble. Lighter weight means less momentum. Less momentum means shorter stops. Therefore, tailgating a motorcycle is arguably safer than tailgating a car because the bike will stop before you do. A motorcycle's stopping distance is generally similar to or longer than a comparable car's, and the margin for rider error during maximum braking is dramatically higher. Modern cars have 4 contact patches, 1 per tire, distributing braking force across 4 points of grip. A motorcycle has 2, and the front brake carries 70 to 80% of braking force. Aggressive front braking can cause the front wheel to lock and the bike to pitch forward, a dynamic that requires significant skill to manage the threshold of maximum deceleration. Under maximum braking, a motorcycle requires the rider to simultaneously manage brake force, body position, throttle, and lateral stability, a multi-axis coordination task that four-wheeled vehicles handle mechanically. NHTSA crash data consistently shows that rear-end collisions are a disproportionately fatal collision type for motorcyclists, in part because of stopping distance miscalculations by following vehicle drivers. Many motorcyclists are trained to use following distance and visual anticipation rather than braking as the primary collision avoidance strategy, precisely because braking to maximum performance on two wheels carries higher risk than the equivalent action in a four-wheeled vehicle. Follow from further back and be wrong about fewer things. 26. Checking your mirrors is the complete answer to blind spot management. Adjust them properly, check them routinely, and you have full situational awareness around the vehicle. The physical head check is redundant if you are using mirrors correctly. Every vehicle has a blind spot that no mirror configuration can eliminate. The Society of Automotive Engineers defines the lateral area beside and slightly behind the vehicle that falls between the rear view mirror's field of view and the side mirror's outer edge. A properly adjusted mirror setup minimizes but cannot eliminate this zone because the geometry of mirror placement creates an irreducible gap between coverage areas. A typical midsize vehicle's blind spot can conceal an entire car or motorcycle traveling at highway speed. This is not a marginal sliver, it is a whole vehicle. Properly adjusted side mirrors are angled outward far enough that the vehicle's own body is barely visible at the mirror's inner edge, which reduces the blind spot significantly but requires unlearning the instinct to see your own car as a reference frame in the side mirror. Blind spot monitoring systems on newer vehicles use radar sensors to cover the gap and alert drivers. Surveys indicate that even drivers with these systems benefit from physical head checks because sensor systems have their own coverage limitations and failure modes. The mirror shows you almost everything. The word almost is where the motorcycle lives. Turn your head. It takes less than a second, and it is the one check that actually covers the gap mirrors cannot reach. 27, the one that genuinely gets people killed quietly, without drama, without a moment they can identify. Driving tired is treated as mildly suboptimal rather than as a serious impairment comparable to intoxication. People acknowledge it, complain about it, then roll down a window and consider the matter handled. Research from the AOTA Foundation for Traffic Safety found that missing 2 to 3 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period roughly quadruples crash risk, a figure comparable to driving at the legal alcohol limit in terms of statistical collision likelihood. Microsleep, involuntary sleep episodes lasting 4 to 5 seconds, occurs without warning and without the driver's awareness that it happened. At 60 miles per hour, 4 seconds of unconsciousness covers approximately 350 feet of completely uncontrolled travel. The countermeasures people commonly use, loud music, cold air, caffeine, are documented to be largely ineffective at preventing microsleep episodes. They reduce the subjective feeling of drowsiness without meaningfully restoring cognitive function or preventing sleep intrusion into an exhausted brain. The NHTSA estimates drowsy driving causes approximately 100,000 police-reported crashes annually, while acknowledging significant underreporting because drowsiness is difficult to confirm. After a crash the way alcohol is confirmed through testing, you cracked a window and turned up the volume and called it a solution. Your brain was already scheduling an outage. The window did not receive that information. 28. The speed limit is the law. Driving at or below posted limits in all conditions is legal, responsible behavior. New drivers are taught the speed limit as a ceiling on acceptable conduct, and most drivers internalize it as a universal target that always represents appropriate speed. Speed limits are set for ideal conditions. Driving the posted limit in fog, ice, heavy rain, darkness, construction zones, or dense traffic may be reckless even though it is technically within the number on the sign. Traffic law in most jurisdictions includes a basic speed law, a principle that a driver must travel at a speed reasonable and prudent for conditions regardless of posted limits. Driving 55 miles per hour in near zero visibility can result in a reckless driving citation, even if the posted limit is 65. Speed limits are typically set at the 85th percentile speed of free-flowing traffic under good conditions, the speed at which 85% of drivers naturally travel, considered statistically safest for general traffic flow. They are not all conditions targets, and were not designed to function as such. Studies of speed-related crash data consistently find too fast for conditions cited as a separate and frequently listed factor from exceeding the posted speed limit, because investigators recognize these are distinct safety concepts. The number on the sign tells you what the law allows in fair weather on a dry road with alert traffic. It is a reference, not a flight plan, and conditions change without updating the sign. 29. Yellow means stop. This is so deeply embedded that cautious drivers treat every yellow light as a near violation, braking hard and early to demonstrate compliance. Proceeding through a yellow light feels legally risky and morally questionable in a way that has no relationship to what the law actually says. The legal definition of a yellow signal in most United States state traffic codes is a warning that the signal is about to turn red and drivers should stop if they can do so safely. The word safely is doing the entire legal work in that sentence and is consistently omitted from how the rule is communicated to new drivers. The dilemma zone is a recognized traffic engineering term for the distance from an intersection where a driver traveling at speed cannot comfortably stop before the line, but also cannot clear the intersection before red. This zone is where rear-end collisions from aggressive stopping are most likely to occur. Red light camera systems have been criticized in multiple jurisdictions for shortening yellow light durations below engineering standards, creating artificially compressed dilemma zones that increase rear-end collision rates while generating citation revenue from drivers in legally ambiguous positions. The instruction to always stop on yellow produces drivers who brake suddenly and unpredictably at intersections, which is a documented cause of rear-end collisions from following vehicles. You were taught a rule that omitted its own most important word and have been making abrupt, unpredictable decisions at intersections based on an incomplete sentence ever since. 30. The belief that larger tires need to look full to be adequately inflated is the equivalent of using your hand to test whether a wall outlet has power. A tire at significantly below recommended pressure can appear visually normal under casual inspection. The deformation indicating low pressure to the naked eye occurs primarily at very low pressure thresholds, well below where performance and safety are already meaningfully compromised. Tire deformation under load is distributed differently than deformation from low pressure in a static state, particularly on SUVs and trucks with stiffer sidewalls, which can appear completely full while running dangerously underinflated. NHTSA data indicates that underinflated tires are a significant factor in tire failure crashes. Underinflation increases heat buildup in the tire structure, accelerates wear, reduces fuel efficiency, and increases stopping distance, none of which are visible from outside the vehicle. The recommended tire pressure printed on the tire sidewall is the maximum cold pressure, not the vehicle's recommended operating pressure. The correct number is on the door jamb sticker or in the owner's manual, and using the sidewall number from the wrong source is an extremely common mistake with real consequences. Modern tire pressure monitoring systems only alert drivers when pressure falls to a threshold that may already represent meaningful underinflation. The warning light is not a substitute for monthly manual checks with a calibrated gauge. Your eyes are not calibrated. The gauge is. One of those costs $8 and fits in a glove compartment. 31. Two-footed driving, 1 foot covering the brake and 1 on the gas, is treated as the mark of an amateur, dangerous in a specific and obvious way that every driver knows. You might press both pedals simultaneously. Single-foot driving is the correct and responsible method, with no exceptions worth considering. In automatic vehicles, two-footed driving is common in certain performance applications and is taught in some high-performance driving schools as a method for minimizing reaction time between acceleration and braking. Heel-toe braking technique is a version of exactly this concept. Unintended acceleration incidents, which drove significant public concern about simultaneous pedal application, were investigated extensively by NHTSA and NASA following high-profile cases. The overwhelming conclusion was driver error involving single-foot operation, specifically confusing the gas pedal for the brake, not two-footed driving causing accidental simultaneous application. The anxiety about two-footed driving has some merit in manual transmission vehicles where the clutch requires precise foot management, but the blanket prohibition was carried over to automatics without re-examination on any evidence-based grounds. Some adaptive driving programs for individuals with physical disabilities specifically train two-footed techniques as accommodations. The actual dangerous pedal error, confusing gas for brake, happens predominantly among single-foot drivers. An entire generation was told this was dangerous based on a theoretical scenario that accident statistics do not particularly support, while the actual documented dangerous behavior was occurring in a different category entirely. 32. Pumping the gas pedal before starting a cold engine. Cold morning, car hesitates, pump the accelerator a few times before turning the key. This piece of mechanical folk wisdom is passed down through generations as necessary priming procedure with the confidence of something field tested and proven. It was field tested and proven for carbureted engines, which ceased to be standard in new vehicles in the United States during the 1980s. Modern fuel-injected vehicles are controlled by an engine management computer that handles cold start fuel delivery automatically without any input from the driver's right foot. Carburetors mixed air and fuel mechanically and could become dry or poorly primed in cold conditions, making manual pump priming of the accelerator pump genuinely useful. This technology was phased out by fuel injection beginning in the late 1970s through the 1980s. Fuel injection systems deliver precisely metered fuel electronically, managed by the engine control unit with cold start enrichment programs already built in. When you turn the ignition to the on position before cranking, modern systems automatically run the fuel pump to pressurize the system. Repeatedly pressing the accelerator on a fuel-injected engine before starting can signal the ECU to enrich the fuel mixture unnecessarily, or on older fuel-injected vehicles can contribute to a flooded condition. The correct procedure for virtually all modern vehicles is to turn the key to on, wait briefly, then crank without touching the gas. Your car has a computer handling this. What it does not have is a feature that benefits from your nervous foot. 33. Turning the steering wheel while the vehicle is completely stationary is a normal part of parking that nobody thinks twice about. You turn the wheel before you move, adjust your position, and proceed. No issue has ever been associated with it in standard driver's education. Turning the steering wheel while the vehicle is stopped, known as dry steering, significantly accelerates tire wear, stresses power steering components, and on older vehicles without power steering can cause joint and linkage damage. When the steering wheel is turned with the vehicle stopped, the contact patch of the tire scrubs against the pavement surface rather than rolling across it. This produces localized wear on the specific section of tire in contact during the stationary turn, a concentration of abrasion that is disproportionate to normal rolling wear over the same distance. Power steering systems, both hydraulic and electric, are designed to assist steering input while the vehicle is in motion. Static turns at maximum steering lock generate maximum load on pump, rack, and tie rod components, stressing seals and bushings over time. The correct technique is to move the vehicle slightly before initiating a sharp turn, distributing the steering scrub across a rolling motion rather than concentrating it at a static contact point. This is not a catastrophic single incident risk. It is a cumulative wear pattern that urban drivers who parallel park frequently accumulate faster than they realize over tens of thousands of miles of small decisions nobody taught them to make differently. 34. Flashing your headlights to warn oncoming drivers of a speed enforcement area is understood as an unwritten rule of road solidarity, broadly practiced, and treated as harmless communication between drivers who share the same conditions and interests. The legality is significantly more complicated than the cultural assumption suggests. Several federal courts, including rulings in Missouri, Florida, and New Jersey, have found that flashing headlights to warn of police constitutes constitutionally protected expression, and law enforcement challenges to these rulings have generally not succeeded at the appellate level. However, some states still issue citations for improper headlight use, and flashing light regulations vary across jurisdictions. The citation may be for improper headlight operation rather than communicative intent, meaning the legality of the act depends on local statute and the specific officer's interpretation on the day in question. Beyond legality, the practice creates a brief stretch of erratic braking behavior as warned drivers slow suddenly, generating its own risk profile immediately ahead of the enforcement location. The broader lesson for any driver who paid attention in driver's ed is that traffic law is not nationally uniform. Practices that are explicitly legal in one state can result in fines in another, and everyone does it is not a legal defense in jurisdictions where the statute disagrees. You learned a piece of road culture and assumed it came with legal clearance everywhere it happens to be practiced. 35. The belief that seatbelts trap occupants in certain crashes, and that being thrown clear of the vehicle is sometimes the safer outcome is perhaps the most persistently dangerous driving myth in circulation because it gives people a reason to rationalize not buckling. The NHTSA reports that seatbelts saved approximately 15,000 lives in a single recent year, and that unbelted occupants are roughly 30 times more likely to be ejected in a crash. Ejection is one of the most consistently fatal crash outcomes. In rollover crashes, the scenario most frequently cited in the thrown clear argument, unbelted occupants are most commonly struck by the vehicle as it rolls over them. Being inside the vehicle with the seatbelt on is protective. Being outside the vehicle as it rolls is near universally the worst outcome regardless of the surface, the speed, or the vehicle involved. The water submersion scenario, being unable to unbuckle in a sinking car, is addressed by keeping a seatbelt cutter and window breaker accessible, not by choosing not to buckle. The belt prevents incapacitating impact during the initial crash that would prevent self-rescue anyway. Every major vehicle safety organization globally recommends seatbelt use without exception across all crash types after extensive analysis of multivariate crash data across decades. Thrown clear is a romantic phrase for a scenario where the road and the vehicle take turns hitting you. The belt keeps you inside the cage absorbs the crash so your body does not have to. 36. The belief that older drivers are experienced and competent while teenagers are the dangerous demographic is the organizing principle of virtually every public safety campaign aimed at new drivers, and it is incomplete in a way that produces real consequences. Both ends of the age spectrum produce elevated crash risk per mile driven. The IINHS reports that drivers 70 and older have higher fatality rates per mile traveled than middle-aged drivers, and that the rate increases significantly for drivers 85 and older. Age-related factors including reduced peripheral vision, slower reaction time, greater medication use, and increased physical fragility, which raises injury severity in crashes that would be minor for younger drivers, all contribute to measurably elevated risk that the data documents consistently. License renewal standards for older drivers vary widely by state, from no additional requirements beyond standard renewal to mandatory vision testing and medical review, meaning the risk is unevenly acknowledged and unevenly managed across jurisdictions. Driver's ed is almost exclusively focused on young driver risk, which is real and well documented. But the systemic omission of aging driver risk leaves families without a framework or language for conversations about when continued driving should be reconsidered. The assumption that age and experience produce a straight upward line of competence that improves indefinitely has no support in the data. The line curves back down past a certain threshold, and nobody in driver's education talks about that part of the graph or prepares anyone for the conversation it eventually requires. 37. The advice to always brake on a long mountain descent to control your speed sounds like the obvious opposite of the correct advice, which is why the counter advice, always downshift and use engine braking instead of your brakes, circulates as the sophisticated mechanical alternative. Neither version told as an absolute is accurate. Brake fade, the reduction in stopping power caused by the heat buildup in brake components during sustained descent, is a real phenomenon. Brake pads and rotors can overheat on long sustained grades, reducing effectiveness at precisely the moment most needed. Engine braking reduces heat load on the brake system by using compression to slow the vehicle, And in manual transmissions, this is a genuine technique with clear mechanical benefit. In modern automatic transmissions, drivers can often select a lower range or use paddle shifters to achieve a similar effect. However, forceful and repeated downshifting in an automatic transmission into too low a gear at too high a speed can damage the transmission's clutch packs and fluid, which are substantially more expensive to address than brake pads. The correct technique for long descents is active speed management. Brake to a target speed, release. Allow engine braking to hold it. Apply friction brakes again in short controlled applications if needed, rather than sustained pedal pressure, which is precisely what generates the heat buildup. The advice was correct about the problem and incomplete about the solution, and the transmission on your automatic does not share your enthusiasm for aggressive downshifting. 38. Defensive driving means going slow and letting everyone go first. This understanding of defensive driving as a posture of maximum caution and constant deference is so widespread that many drivers would define it exactly that way. Yielding constantly, driving below traffic speed, prioritizing courtesy over decisiveness at every opportunity. The original defensive driving framework, developed by the National Safety Council, defines the concept as driving to save lives, time, and money, in spite of the conditions around you and the actions of others. The emphasis is on active anticipation and decisive response. Passivity is not in the definition. Traffic flow research consistently shows that unpredictable, hesitant driving, excessive yielding at uncontrolled intersections, failure to commit to merges, erratic speed variation, creates the uncertainty that causes other drivers to make dangerous, compensatory decisions. True defensive driving includes establishing an extended visual horizon, managing escape routes, understanding following vehicle behavior, communicating intent early through signals, and recognizing pre-crash cues. None of those skills are about being slow or deferential. Overly cautious drivers who yield when not required, stop when they have right-of-way, or informally wave pedestrians across without legal authority, create ambiguity that causes crashes when the pedestrian and the adjacent vehicle both proceed simultaneously because the driver's informal wave was differently interpreted. Defensive driving was never about being the most polite person on the road. It is about being the most predictable, most aware, and most prepared person on it. 39. The dilemma zone revisited from a different angle. Many drivers believe that at any moment of uncertainty, hesitation is the safe choice. If you are not sure, wait. If something feels wrong, slow down and think. Hesitation feels like caution. At specific moments in traffic, hesitation is the dangerous choice. Not because boldness is inherently safe, but because committed action at the right moment is structurally different from the same action executed hesitatingly half a second later. Merging is the clearest example. A driver who identifies a gap, begins to merge, loses confidence, and pulls back has now done something more dangerous than either completing the merge or not starting it. They have moved partway into an adjacent lane and then reverse that movement, creating a brief period of ambiguous positioning that following and adjacent vehicles cannot predict or respond to reliably. Commitment to the correct action at the correct moment is what gap selection in a merge is designed for. The gap exists for the duration of a committed merge. It does not exist for the duration of a tentative one. Intersection entry on green produces the same dynamic. A driver who begins to enter and then brakes creates conflict with the vehicle behind them without gaining any safety benefit from the partial hesitation. Hesitation and caution are not synonyms. One of them is a decision, the other is the absence of a decision at a moment when a decision was required. 40. The rain means reduce your speed by 10 miles per hour. Rule has the appealing precision of a real rule while having no actual derivation from physics, traffic law, or road safety research. It is a number that sounds specific enough to be scientific and is vague enough to have been generated entirely by intuition. The required speed reduction in rain depends on rainfall intensity, road drainage quality, tire tread depth, and compound vehicle type, visibility distance, and traffic density. In heavy rain, a legitimate safe speed reduction can require 30 miles per hour or more from dry condition speed, depending on surface, standing water, and visibility. Hydroplaning, where a tire rides on a water film rather than road surface and loses traction, can begin at speeds as low as 35 miles per hour on worn tires and standing water. The tread depth of the tire and the depth of water on the road surface determine that threshold, not a universal number. Stopping distances in wet conditions increase by 30 to 50% compared to dry conditions at the same speed. Visibility is a separate variable. Heavy rain that limits sight distance to 100 feet requires speed reduction to a level where a complete stop can be executed within the visible distance ahead, regardless of what that number happens to be on the speedometer. The weather did not send you a memo confirming 10 miles per hour is sufficient. It produced whatever conditions it produced, and those conditions have never consulted your rule of thumb. 41. The belief that you can reliably assess your own level of impairment after drinking is so deeply embedded that it functions as the primary decision-making tool for the most consequential driving choice most people will ever face. I feel fine is the standard applied. No behavioral or perceptual self-test reliably indicates actual impairment at legally significant blood alcohol levels. This is not a matter of threshold or degree. Impairment at 0.08 BAC frequently feels like complete sobriety to the person who is impaired, particularly for regular drinkers who have developed significant tolerance to the subjective sensation of intoxication. Tolerance means the body has adapted to function with alcohol present and reduces the felt experience of impairment, not the actual cognitive and motor performance impairment measured in objective testing. A person can feel completely sharp, completely in control, and be measurably impaired on every cognitive task relevant to driving simultaneously. The 1 drink per hour formula discussed earlier depends on self-reported drink counts, self-assessed standard drink sizes, and self-estimated body weight contributions to BAC, all variables that intoxicated people estimate poorly. Studies of drivers arrested for impaired driving consistently find a significant proportion who genuinely believed they were safe to drive at the time of the stop. The feeling of being fine is produced by the same brain chemistry that is currently impairing your judgment. That is not a reliable instrument for calibrating its own dysfunction. 42. The final myth is the one underneath all the others, the assumption that completing driver's education and passing a driving test means you know how to drive. The test measures minimum threshold competency in a narrow set of skills assessed on a single day under low-pressure conditions with an evaluator present. It does not measure night driving, highway merging at speed, emergency maneuver execution, driving in rain or snow, managing distraction, or any of the higher-risk scenarios that produce the majority of serious crashes. Countries with substantially better road safety outcomes require significantly more supervised driving hours before licensing, include mandatory adverse condition training, and test hazard perception and decision-making under uncertainty rather than only basic vehicle control and rule recall. The United States minimum supervised driving hour requirements vary by state and are among the lowest in the developed world. The test you passed was designed to confirm you can operate the vehicle within a parking lot and on a quiet road during daylight under supervision, knowing the evaluation is occurring. That is a very different skill set from driving competently in the range of conditions the road produces across a lifetime. Passing the test means you met the minimum standard on a specific day. It was the beginning of learning to drive, not the conclusion of it, and the road has been providing the rest of the curriculum ever since, whether you recognize the lessons or not. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now